It's so funny because one of the things I have going on in me in a lot of different ways is was it yesterday at work, I believe it was, or today at work, I don't even remember now. It's funny, I don't have a concept of time, and I find that kind of fascinating sometimes. Where I've met Native Americans, actually a very young Native American that I bought a dream catcher from up in North Dakota. Watched the ceremonial dances and from these young kids, 12, 13 years old, up to this just turned 18-year-old kid performing various Native American dances. And then they had a few items that they had made, personally made. So about this dream catcher from him, that the story is that he hunted the buffalo, he dyed the uh, the leather, basically dyed the hide, and it's all the sinew is from this animal, and everything's from this animal. And when we were talking, he asked me this really funny question. It was a very simple conversation, but it's very profound and deep. For me, it was very deep because I don't normally have conversations with individuals like that where there's only a three or four sentences have passed, but it seems like so much passes also between us, understandings or such like this. It's kind of weird or an odd way to think of it. But one of the things he said to me that I found very fascinating is I was talking about the dream catcher, and I said, basically, I expressed my gratitude for what he had made, what he
Yeah,
had handcrafted, you know.
yeah,
And I said, I just want to emphasize the respect I have for this item that I'm getting from you.
yeah.
And I said, it will be in a very special place, and I do. I have a great respect for this item. Unlike something I go down Walmart and buy as an example, or off eBay or Amazon, right?
I was
So
just
I
gonna say, right? I was just gonna say, and as you're having this conversation, the Amazon truck pulls up and says, did you order a bundle of pleather?
Yeah, it was so funny because this man was alien to me. Not that I he was from a different state in a different time frame than myself growing up, but he was actually alien in so many ways. Like the Native Americans that I had met years ago traveling in the Southwest, I met some people down there that were alien in their process of thinking and their process of life. Was very
Alien
unique
to
to
how?
me.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, understand.
So so then he asked me this question, and it stunned me. And for several years afterwards, it would come up on a weekly basis, even sometimes on a daily basis. He said, I wish I could have the exact words because it was very potent what he said to me. He says, I see people driving around with dream catchers in their car rearview mirror, but he said it in a very simple manner, not as complex as that.
Yeah.
And he said, I hope they're not sleeping while they're trying to drive. And he genuinely meant that. It was so innocent and so pure coming from this man. He was so puzzled by why would somebody put a dream catcher in their rearview mirror. And I didn't laugh. I was actually very stunned when he said this, and I said, I agree. I hope they're not asleep. I really did. At that point, I realized
See, but
the
he
gravity.
likely means something else by it, right?
Yeah.
Than how your faculties were able to take that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what the conversation was like. Was very. I almost said disconnected. It wasn't disconnected. It was like more was said in the world with us than it was in the verbal, and it was amazing. I felt very comfortable with this gentleman. Just like the Native American I gave a ride to, he just said, "This is my stop," and I acted and like an idiot, 19 years old or whatever. I said, "There's nothing out here. This is just barren land to me." And he said, "My house is there. My basically my house is over there." And I'm looking off in the distance, just rolling hills of dirt. That's what I saw at that time. Watching this man going over these dunes, I'm like, this guy lost his loonies. He drank alcohol or something, And that was my reasoning at that point. But over the years, when I was a kid growing up, we used to have stories about the Native Americans, in the Southwest, a driver going down the road, and it was kind of a joke, but but the reality was it was the truth. People driving down the highway in these little two lane, the old highways, not these super highways we got. These two lanes at night, and they hit a speed bump in the middle of nowhere, pure black, pitch black out there. There's no lights out there whatsoever. There's no villages, no towns, no cities or anything. And they go driving along and thump thump. And after the second or third one, they finally pull over, try to figure out, what the hell was that? They just drove over a Native American. And the reason why is what they discovered is these older people, the older Native Americans, these older people they had no concept at the time of future, basically. They had no concept so they would walk from wherever they were going to, they would walk, they would do on a journey or whatever to go there. It come nightfall, and they would lie down where it was warm. Well, the pavement obviously is warm. It absorbed the heat from the sun during the day, and they would lie down without any idea or future concept of a vehicle coming down the road, and they would go to sleep for the night, and they would get run over. And this happened in the 70s and the 60s quite frequently, actually, in the 80s. Not so much in the 80s, but more in the 60s and 70s. There were a lot of Native Americans that were driven over. So that kind of came into my brain, with this gentleman walking across the desert like that, and this young man in North Dakota, my Native American friend that I had in Colorado some years back, and trying to see the world in the manner that they do. To me, it's so extremely foreign. My Oriental friends, same thing. I'm sure when in your travels, you came up on cultures that their way of processing of it is so foreign to us, or foreign to me rather. I'm not speaking for you or anybody else, but for me, it's very foreign because I'd never said, wow, there's a new way of processing or viewing something or thinking about philosophies or whatever it is, right? The Tahitian people, same thing. The way they look at life is so, I don't know, in my world, it's so simple. But in the end, it's actually pretty complex. But for me, from the world I live in with all the electronics and the, speeding around here and there, they go out to fish for their dinner as an example. And but yeah, it's just funny. So it's cropped up yesterday, thinking about this Native American kid and how happy I was to have met him. And it was maybe a 5, maybe 7 minutes at most that we, were next to each other and had a dialogue. And it was stunning. For me, it was very stunning. I'm sure he was more like, damn white people. There goes another dream catcher. I'm sure I'm going to see it in the car going down the road here in a minute. But no, I know that he knew that I would never do that. And I also that he knew I would. I'm sorry?
His impression, his perception of you would have been based on two things. First of all, how alert and aware and awake he was. And second of all, what you were radiating.
Yes.
In that moment, right? And it has to be this kind of two-way exchange. You can have.
Yep.
Well, you know this. You can walk down the street and you just might be absolutely fizzed up with content, fizzed up with something, related to God and creation that you had just been working into. And I find it curious, actually, when I am in crowded areas like grocery stores or malls or places like that, how many people will physically bump into me as I walk by. Yes. I find that very curious, right? And there's a couple different ways that you can take it. You can get a bit hot about it, You can enter the tone or the frame of judgment, and almost this kind of, how dare you? You're not the only person on the planet. I happen to be standing here. Thank you very much. Or you can take it from another perspective. You can take it from the perspective of being alert to the reality of the situation as opposed to necessarily how you want it to be sometimes. Being able to kind of take in, be hungry, be searching constantly with your faculties and with your eyes. be searching with your senses to keep yourself there, to keep yourself in that. Well, let's see. I'll grant a lot of grace, okay, and I'll say keep yourself in that awakened state. What I mean by grant a lot of grace, I think we'll probably work into it more this evening, but um, it's generally not the case. Yeah, like
Yeah.
we talked a time or two ago. I think it was just in one of our telephone calls, but we talked about how we as humans are kind of constantly attributing something to ourselves that isn't necessarily there.
Right. Right.
And
It so I noticed a couple of different things. One of them I'll bring up here in a little bit. But what you said about somebody hitting you, what was funny is I had this perception. Um, Somebody bumped into me, and I turned and looked at this fella, and I thought, wow, that's pretty odd. I mean, I think I'm pretty visible.
yeah,
Um,
maybe like 6'3" or something, aren't you?
yeah, I actually shrank.
Okay,
But,
well,
yeah, but part of it is I have an incline bench. When I do go on it, I'm back to my 6'3" again, but I dropped about 3/4 of an inch. But yeah, basically 6'3".
yeah,
And I love to what I call get dolled up. Now I don't do that as much anymore, but I love to, and not for anybody else, but for myself. And it is to do with myself. To it, I don't know. It's just something about getting dolled up, wearing not a three-piece suit, but I like very unique, very one of a kind clothing and so forth. And so sometimes I've had people hit me in that, and I think, well, they got distracted. Well, this gentleman hit me in the shoulder, and the first thought was, I was like, wow, I'm pretty visible. And then I had this image in my head of a meteor flying through space and hitting something like a planet, our planet, Mars, moon, the moon, our moon, or whatever, right?
huh,
And and then it immediately went into something like a tennis ball hitting, or table, sorry, table tennis, a ping pong hitting table. It's actually losing some atoms, right?
mm.
And it's knocking some atoms free, basically, from the table and from the ball, right?
So
You're
yeah,
looking
so
at me kind of, you're kind of looking at me funny there. I'm sorry.
no. I'm precasting where you're going with this. I think what you're saying is that kind of uh, electrical exchange manifests itself on the physical level.
Exactly. Now, part of my thought too was is I've asked myself in some different cases, I've asked myself, what are the odds of that individual hitting me? And
Yeah.
what was the exchange? Basically, what I'm trying to say is the exchange. It wasn't good enough. So it's not, I don't want to say it wasn't good enough, but it was almost like it wasn't good enough to just pass through each other's auras. But it's like it had to be that physical contact to transfer something, to deliver something, or whatever. I don't see it as happen chance. I see it as something. I don't see it as intentional from the individual, because I think a lot of times these people are like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," and I know it's genuine. It's not intentionally bumping into me to cause an issue or be aggressive or anything like that. It's just a genuine thing. Look right at me and then walk into me. It's like It's like, and so I think sometimes maybe it was a process I was in that made myself invisible to that individual. You know.
So what
Um,
kind of attitude do you hold about things like that?
I used to take, well, as a young man, I used to take it personal and I puff up and act like a badass, right? And then I realized, you know what, that's bullshit. For me, I realized that for me, that's bullshit. Um, I usually give an eyeball to the person, and I've noticed this over the years. It's not so much about sizing them up,
Yeah.
but I wonder why and what caused them to bump into me. Now, there were cases where guys were trying to start an issue, a physical issue, a physical altercation. That I understood. I mean, it's very clear. But some of the people, both men and women, that have bumped into me, um, are very surprised at what happened. I can tell it's genuine. I feel it's genuine. But but it makes me wonder sometimes if maybe I should have said something like, have you ever thought about astrology? Or something, have you ever thought about the aura? Just something, it's almost like they were run into me for some reason. I know this is really out there, just my thought
Or
process
or, or you want to take, or you want to help take them out
of
of.
what they're in.
Yeah. So yeah, do you have a criteria for how you place an attitude? Because the thing about an attitude, uh, until you've become very accomplished, you can't generate one on the spot. You
Right.
probably realize this already from your
Yeah.
life, that if you go out into the world thinking that your attitude is going to get you by, the world is going to get your attitude by, isn't it? The world is going to bump
Yeah.
you out of yourself
Oh, yes.
into whatever kind of force is prevalent at the time. And so, one of the important aspects of this work really has to do with spending some time with yourself, working on various attitudes so that you can have this kind of repertoire of
Right.
attitudes and be able to go out into the world, encounter something, and say, ah, that fits this attitude that I've developed over the years that
Right.
suits this particular purpose. Otherwise, you'll really be at the whim of whatever attitude happens to be the dominant signal of the area. So, do you have criteria by which you form attitudes from?
So here I'm going to take a little side note
All right.
or a side road for a moment. And that is when I was pretty young, I was in, I believe, junior high, seventh or eighth grade. I wrote a paper and I got an F. I basically flunked out of high school and flunked out of a lot of classes because they thought I was a kind of a whack job. Teachers thought, who the hell do you think you are, writing this stuff. But I wrote a paper years ago. And funny enough, I was in college, taking some college classes rather, and I'm fascinated with sociology,
Uh,
and I came across this paper, and I was furious, absolutely furious. This author took my paper and wrote a whole thing on this.
yeah.
And what it has to do with is faces. I called it faces at the time. So what I'm saying by that is I observed myself and I observed other people. So I would watch myself interact with yourself as an example, turn around, interact with one of my roommates, and then turn around, interact with, say, a gas attendant, right? And I noticed in myself as a kid and throughout the years, the same thing is I had a different persona for every person. So I wrote this paper about faces that we have this wall of faces. We put on these faces depending on what we're dealing with and so forth. So now taking that and looking at myself, looking at people, I used to watch people, the masks actually switch on them. I could see them actually switch the mask out. It was very fascinating. And I've seen this over the years with people. So what I noticed with myself when somebody bumped into me is there were a couple of occasions where it was almost like looking at this wall ahead of me and choosing out the mask to fit the situation, if that makes sense. And
Yes.
that to me also comes down to my attitude. Now, the attitude, I also have a pegboard full of different attitudes, and I look at those and I try to feel out which one is appropriate for the situation. But what I realized on the same hand is it's I feel like I'm getting played at that point.
How
It's like
so?
I'm sorry.
How so? How do you feel like you're getting played?
It's like there are times like I feel like I need to be indignant. There's
Oh,
times that I feel that I need to be apologetic. There's time, and I go and I take a step back afterwards for myself. Later, I look at it and I go, "Why did that come into me? Why did I have that in me? What brought that about? Was it this other individual? Was it the location?" And ask myself. I'm trying to answer your question, hopefully not in too much of a roundabout way. Um, but I do know that there are times when I'm not prepared, if that makes sense. It's like a free for all, and I don't
yeah,
have
right,
control of it.
right.
And that bothers me because I don't have control of what comes out of me. And there are times
So,
when I'm sorry.
You've blurred the lines a little bit between roles and attitudes.
Yes, yes,
A role, which is what you were calling a face or a mask or these types
right.
of things, the role is generally speaking the external presentation of something, right? And so,
Yes,
if
yes.
you, I mean, every man and lady should have the internal versatility to be free enough to be angry on the spot, if that's what's called for, or
Exactly,
to be
exactly.
compassionate on the spot, right? I mean,
Yep.
you should be able to just as easily clean the toilet as you can lead an army. That's the kind of versatility that you want to strive for in your life, as an example, right? There's,
Right,
there's
right.
rarely going to be a need, obviously, for you to lead an army, but could you, if you were called upon to do it, would you be able to lead an army? Or would a four-star general be able to clean a toilet? I think is the fair
No, it's true. Right.
question of that, right? But those
Yep.
are those are roles. Now, roles are uh, much more complex than attitudes because what they entail is a series of attitudes combined with a skill called mumming. Yeah, we've talked about mumming before. Mumming is really the aspect of, well, it can only happen in three different ways in three different centers. Yeah, three different. The thinking, moving, or instinctive center are in charge of mumming, but a bunch of attitudes can go into a role. Yeah, but an attitude is something very whole, very singular in and of itself. It's actually based on five different parts, obviously to the five centers, but an attitude itself is a prearranged, really discipline that's based on a criteria, which we'll work into today, what the criteria is and how to generate an attitude about
Right.
things that's appropriate for a particular situation. But this requires something like pre-work. You know, before you set foot into the world for the day, you should uh, at least have generated a couple new attitudes for your repertoire. And it kind of reminds me, what is that line from Alice in Wonderland? You know, why I think three preposterous things before breakfast. Three impossible things, right? Right? Do you ever think
Love
of?
that line. Loved it.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
I think of at least three impossible things before breakfast. You
Yes.
should have three brand new attitudes at your disposal, and you may not need them in the day. It's not like you go hunting for an opportunity to have a particular attitude. But the thing that you'll find is that a lot of times a particular attitude that you've taken the time to consciously develop actually has a lot broader application than you might realize. Because you can take something like, what's your attitude? We talked about this last time. What's your attitude towards your house?
Yeah.
And that's going to dictate what your attitude is as you walk through a park, if you do it right, and what your attitude is as you walk around your office. Because it should be the same attitude, because then it becomes based in something more fundamental, which is one of the nine qualities, care being one of them. I see you're getting stacked up, so go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, sorry. One of the things that came to me that I do is I feel it before it happens,
Yeah,
and I'm able to dodge it a lot of times.
good.
I actually find my reaction is I don't want to be influenced by them, if that makes sense. I don't want that physical touch. And I'll find that my body does this twist and I can feel them pass by me.
Yeah,
And it's so weird because I've had people turn around and look at me, and I know it wasn't intentional. They're trying to bump me. It wasn't they were going to try to bump me, but kind of look at me like, wow, that was a really wild move or whatever, right? They're startled by the reaction that I had, but I keep on going, and it's like I'm in my groove. Don't I'm being groovy with myself going down the street. Don't fuck with me, man. Type, but it's not that attitude, but that's the way it feels.
yeah.
Where I actually roll right by him, but I don't let them affect me. If that
I
makes
think it
sense.
was Dong Haichuan. The was it the is
Is
that his
it?
name? The inventor of martial arts style called Bagua I think his name was Dong Hai Chuan, and he was hired as the head of the Imperial Guard for the Emperor. And the reason why is because his test with the Emperor, the Emperor has these soldiers, has these guards around him, and Dong Hai Chuan's test was to fight them. But instead of fighting them, like 8, 10 of them, right? Instead of fighting them, he was able to maneuver in such a ways so that
Yes.
they could never touch him, right? All he was just maneuvering and flowing in and out, and that's how he was able to get that position. That's also the basis of a particular style
Form.
called Bagua. But kind of reminds me of what you're saying there. Like you just flow, yeah,
It's
flow
and
around.
it's amazing. It's like you become liquid,
Yeah.
and you everything's very fluidic. I don't and there's really no yeah. So I was just keeping it at that.
Okay, right. So roles versus attitudes. Yeah, it's good.
Right.
Good to have a grasp on the difference between a role versus
Yes.
an attitude. You can't help having a role in living in society, living in a
Right.
culture. You might
Right.
be able to get away with it in the mountains, yeah, where you just kind of grow a beard, get strange, and no interaction or whatever. But anytime that you're interacting with people, other people,
Yes. That.
a role
Yes.
will be superimposed upon you by the culture.
Right.
A role will be self-generated from your own life to the culture. You see, and so that's the difference between roles. They're either placed upon you by the culture. In other words, you're at a party, right, a dinner party, and someone says, "So, what do you do?" And people say the same thing. They say, "I am a." You know,
Yes.
I'm an electrical engineer. I mean, think about the profundity of saying something like this. I
Yes.
am an electrical engineer. I am
Right.
a doctor. I am an attorney. I am a construction worker, right? People, that's a role of life being superimposed. Now, of course,
Yes.
if you're at a party and you're expected to behave in a particular way, right? I mean, you're in the environment of a party, so it's okay to say I'm an engineer, for example. Sorry, I got honey on my fingers. Now it's all sticky. But it's okay to say that as long as you can also acknowledge to your own inner lives that you are not that, right? That's what a role is. You go to a party, you be the party, but inside it you have this kind of separation, and you don't let your inner faculties buy into the concept that you are a construction worker. You aren't. You do
No, it's so true.
construction, for example, but you are not a construction worker. It's what
Yeah.
you do in a particular setting.
Yeah.
In another role, you're a
It's
construction worker or an engineer. Okay.
it's funny because I call myself the mechanic,
Okay.
and what that is for me, and I never even thought about it as a role, but it is a role. And this way, that's my cocoon, my protection, if you will, my role that I when I deal with certain individuals, I just say I'm the mechanic. I'm the building
Sure.
mechanic. And what that does right there is they have an idea in their head of what a mechanic does and all that, and they leave me the fuck alone. They don't fuck with me anymore. They don't mess with me. They think, oh, this guy's at a certain level. Then I've had people come back after getting to know me a little more, and they call me the Buddha or the Yoda. I'm sorry, they call me Yoda, and then later on they call me the Golden Yoda. And they go, "You're so fucking smart," or "You're so smart," and I laugh. I laugh every time. And they start to realize the depth of my knowledge is not just how to turn a bolt, use a tool in a proper manner or whatever. They start to realize, shit, when I asked a question about something, this guy's the depth of his knowledge is not of a mechanic. And so they don't know where to put me. And it's funny because everybody's got to have, at least from my perception right now is what I see is people need to have a title for you, for me, for everybody. So they see me, and it's funny because I've had a couple of people come to me and they say, "Man, I thought you were some old white fucker that was bigoted," you know. And I started laughing and laughing and laughing. I said, "What makes you say that?" I mean, you know, to myself, I didn't really want to get into it with them. It was not the time or place, nor I felt they were not going to be capable or able to even get into that kind of arena or depth. But they put me into that role that they thought I would be in. They thought this old fucker, you know, and all that. So here's a quick funny story. I walk into a hotel before I found this place here, or the other, basically moved down south, and I'd taken the dogs out to go for pee and poop, and I went back in, and the mirror is right there in the door, or right by the door. And as I walk in, I see this old son of a bitch following me in the room. And so I turn around and I'm trying to let the leashes out of my hand because I'm ready to either fight or ask him, you know, push him out of the room or whatever. And the door closes and there's a lavatory, or basically a washroom, right next to it, to the left as you walk in the door. The mirror's on the right, and it's about 3 steps in. So I thought this old fucker, you know, disappeared in the bathroom. I went in there and I pulled the curtain aside, ready for whatever. You know, I was cocked and ready just to do the best I could to whatever I was going to be greeted by. It's empty. So I go over and I said he had to have slipped underneath one of the 2 beds. I get down there and I go, yeah, it's like 6 inches. This guy is not fitting in there. Well, I stood up and I started walking towards the door and I saw that same son of a bitch again. I realized that was me. And I started laughing so hard, I fell to the ground. I mean, literally knees buckled out underneath me. I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. But I don't have a concept of myself, if that makes sense, in that manner. I don't see that. I don't feel it. People say, don't you feel old? Or why do you walk so fast? You should be walking slow and doddery. And I laugh. I go, that's the role they think I should do. And then yesterday, I think was or actually, I'm sorry, Monday, I had this coworker that she's, I don't know, maybe 8 years. She's about your age, about 10 years, 8 years, 10 years younger. And she says, you know, you should act your age physically. You should act your age. You should be, you know, you shouldn't be doing the type of work you're doing. You should, you know, slow down and all this. I said, I'm sorry, I don't have a concept of that. But that's the roles that I perceive when I hear the word roles.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I'm sorry about all the stories. It's so I understand where you're going with this, with the roles.
Yeah.
I just want to throw that in, that we are also put in those roles by society and what they expect of us. They see you as an example.
That's what I was saying, is
Yeah.
that if you don't have a role for a situation, if you've not already secured
Yes.
a role for a situation, it will be placed upon you.
Yes.
So really what it comes down to is the choice of what are you really going to be versus what are you going to do? How's your external portrayal? You know? I wouldn't be able to, if I only had one role, yeah, Pierce the Jackass, for example, and I come out and I, you know, teach my lessons with vigor and belligerence and whatever else, you know, type of thing. Sure, certain amount of people would be attracted to that kind of thing because that would actually resonate with them.
Right.
Other people would be absolutely turned away from it. And,
Exactly.
thing, when you deal with a group of people, you know, and I've obviously right now we're just one-on-one, but when I've had large groups of people, you literally have to go around the room and put on a role here.
Yes.
That's a different role from over here. That's a different role from over here. Yeah. And that takes again, we go back to this term of versatility. Are you versatile enough to be a general leading a command and a janitor the next second? That's kind of versatility. Yeah.
I didn't quite grasp it. Now, just one quick story, and then I was in a situation over a number of hours, basically almost a 24-hour period. I was awake and going around with this other individual. At the end of the day, as we were headed home, about 10 o'clock the next day, and we've been out for about 24 hours, 25 hours at this point, and he looked at me, he says, I don't understand you. I grew up with you. He's my brother. And he says, I grew up with you. And he says, I don't understand you. And I kind of gave him side eye and said, what do you mean? He said, look, man, he says, you walked up to people, CEOs from some of these big companies in Denver at the time. We dealt with people living under the bridge. We dealt with people of basically the whole spectrum. He said, and you had a way to talk to every one of these people and interact with them. And he said, your mannerisms and the way you approach them with the business people. He says, I swear to God, you appeared to me like a businessman talking at their level. And he says, I don't think you've ever had any business, acumen or basically any knowledge about business, but yet you were dealing on a level that he didn't understand. My brother had no concept of. And he says, next, 5 minutes later, we're dealing with a guy sleeping under a bridge, and you're not at his, well, you're at his level, not went down to his level, because I don't see it that way, but you were dealing in his world. And you were having this conversation about life on the street. And he goes, and the next thing we know, we're talking to a waitress waiting at the bus stop with her as we're bouncing around. And he goes, and you're talking about something. He goes, I don't understand you. He says, you're just like I'm using my own words now, but it was like fluidic and having these different roles. And I've felt that throughout life, that I found ways to not accommodate. I'm sorry, I'm correcting myself. I found ways to actually step into, I guess, the role. I would, in the past, I call it like a persona, so that I could deal with that individual, and actually really had some wonderful conversations from many different people of all walks of life. Walked into black bars, Hispanic bars, speak no English or speak no Spanish rather, and walk in there, and instead of bouncing out the door, on my butt, I'm laughing it up with the guys after 15, 20 minutes. It's like I find a way to integrate, if you will, or to take on a role that is accepted. I don't know if this is what you're driving at. I'm sorry about going off on all this.
No, I get where you're coming from. It
And it's
raises
probably
another
not.
question in me. Raises another question in me is,
Yeah.
uh, you might have developed a lot of different roles, but can you also not have one? Can you not? And this is going to sound funny, right? But
Right,
can you
right.
not be you for a moment? Not asking, I'm not telling you, this is not a criticism, but
No,
are
no,
you
no, no. I want to hear it.
not being you for a moment? Got you there.
I was going to say I have observed myself where I was like, I've never seen that in me, but no, I honestly cannot say yes, I've experienced something like that.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Fair enough. It's something to think about, right?
yeah. No, it
It,
is. It is.
you, going
It
back to
kind
that idea of before breakfast, try not to be yourself at least 3 times before breakfast.
of, that it's funny because one of the things I do to my dogs is I try to take on different personas that act out of character to me. And not to I'm not trying to scare my dogs or freak my dogs out, but I have a freedom there, if that makes sense. I
No
have a freedom
judgment.
to be myself,
Yeah.
and one of the
This all
things.
ties into mumming as well. This is
Yeah,
one of the arts to and really mumming is it's another word for connective work.
yeah,
And so you can mum being that general, you can mum being the mechanic, you can mum uh, being all sorts of things. But the question is, can you mum you? I don't mean you, I mean the essence of you. Can you mum your future development? Is another example, is another question. Can you mum what Eon's going to be like 20 years from now? Yeah. In
I,
the level of understanding, knowledge, development, all of these types of things. Can you mum future you? It's a really good exercise to try and engage in. But I want to stick,
yeah,
I want to stick a bit more with attitude.
right.
Okay. Because this is what's kind of coming in, and I think it would be very useful on the heels of Tuesday. the things that we were talking about on Tuesday. And I didn't get the chance to do a reheat with you, but I think based on what's kind of going through you at the moment and in
It
this type
just,
of engagement,
yeah,
it's there. It's still around. Yeah, but I want to elevate it now outside of things like tone and posture and movement and these things that we talked about in the last meeting. Uh, and make it more applicable to how to develop a criteria for attitude. Because attitude, as it was said once upon a time, attitude will either bring you directly to God or forever keep you away. That's the thing, right?
and
And
it,
so let me ask you this from the
yeah,
thinking center point of view. Uh, Attitude has 5 ingredients. Okay, so we're going to talk about each of the center's role in being able to develop an attitude before you leave the house. Develop an attitude in your spare time where you're thinking, I've got 10 minutes here. I wonder, it's just like alchemy, right? I mean, you want to make this tincture. You can call that an attitude, but you want to manufacture, generate in yourself a particular attitude about something. And you're going to need a framework of how to do that. So I would like to start kind of run through what that means for each of the centers because they all have to be on board with it or it's going
yes,
to be a lopsided attitude. One of them, for example, the moving center might not get the message, might not have the criteria for it, and absolutely become an obstacle for you being able to have and hold that kind of attitude. Now, I do want to make it clear, first of all, is while a role can be an act, an attitude is something of value. An attitude is not an act. An
right,
attitude is another word to apply to it. An attitude is an assembly. It's a very good word for this because you assemble a certain attitude in yourself. And that assembly always has 5 parts, at least at the lower level of things. Eventually, it's got 7, you see. But so what is the criteria for the attitude of the thinking center? Based on what you know of the thinking center. Criteria itself is a thinking center word. Do you recognize that?
yes, yes, definitely do. Um, well, for one, it'd be very factual. I mean,
Ah,
it would be very factual. It would not be. It also would not be in a manner of. Um, oh, what am I trying to say, my lord? The way I kind of refer to it is like white light or white noise. You put the spectrum in there, and you can pull the spectrum out, whether it's noise or whatever frequency it is, whatever electromagnetic wave it is or frequency it is. It's going to come out untainted. That's the way I see the mental faculty. Is it takes it in and it's non emotional. Obviously, it's not judgmental in any fashion. It is very factual. It's very cut and dried, very clean and
so how
tidy.
do you know when your attitude is having the effects that you engineered it for? From a thinking center point of view, I should say.
First off, I mean, the first thought in my head, which I'm not going to filter it. The first thought in my head is looking at that attitude that's emerging out of me. Is I know very quickly that this is something that's going to move me forwards or draw me back, hold me
There you
back.
go. You have to be able to measure it.
Thank you.
It
Yes,
has to be
yes,
measurable. Okay.
yes,
So as you're constructing an assembly around a particular attitude for a situation, a style or type of encounter, the first part of it that you need is how am I going to measure either
yes,
whether it's working or whether it's not? And then you put the thinking center
yes.
in charge of that. Okay. The thinking center is going to be the overwatch of whether the attitude is effective and whether it is engineered the way that you need it to be engineered, or if you need to analyze it, take it back home with you and say, this needs some work. This attitude needs some work. All right. So, first part about that is measurability. Okay. Thinking center, measurability.
Right, right. I'm sorry, I'm trying.
No, good, good. I've got you there. No, good.
Actually, here's what's kind of funny is all I could see was white. I could see your face, but all I could see was white, blank sheet, open possibilities in my head, and I'm like, wow.
All right.
Um,
So
yeah,
what about for the emotional center? We're going to kind of go through these in rapid succession as opposed
yes,
to
yeah.
spending. We could spend an hour on what it means to measure, what it means, all of these sorts of things. But our Tuesday and Thursday nights have a kind of a cap on them. So I want to make sure we get at least to a certain point. It doesn't have to be the entirety of things. But
We
what
need.
would you say?
Oh gosh, I just had it a moment ago. I don't want to say it's gain and loss. I don't want to say it's about feeling. I don't quite have it in me what it is, but I can sense it. It is a I'm sorry, I'm filtering it out, filtering myself here.
I'm going to put the word reasonable to it. Now, you may think that's a thinking center function,
No, I
but
would,
reasonable is not a thinking center function. Well, some people might think it is, right? Because they have this notion that to reason through something, but reasoning through something is actually measuring something. When when you reason through something, or I should say, when you find something to be reasonable, it's
right,
because we can connect to it at that point. Emotions are a very connective aspect to it. Yeah. And so you need to be able to have that kind of interplay with something. If you and I are having a conversation, yeah,
right,
you have a particular point to make, and I have a particular point to make, and we kind of do this back and forth type of thing. The measurability of it is whether we get a result out of it, whether we are able to come to a higher ground of understanding.
okay,
That's the
right,
thinking center. The process, we will go through several iterations where you say something and I go, that's reasonable. Right. And I say something and you go, yeah, that's reasonable. I can see how that is. Yeah, that sort of thing. That's actually emotional content being exchanged back and forth. Reason is never a one sided street, nor is it
no,
definitive. Yeah. Measurability is definitive. It's either 6 inches or it's not.
right,
Yeah.
right.
It either meets the mark or it doesn't. You're either on target. And archery, you've either sinned or you haven't. Yeah.
So part of me, I would have asked, why is it not the instinctual?
Because the instinctual is something else.
I know that. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. But
Well,
yeah,
talk about it. What
yeah,
the instinctual is honest. It must be honest. The instinct
that's
never
true.
lies.
That's true. That's true.
The
That's true.
instinct absolutely never lies. You are either hungry or you are not. You are
Right.
either in fight mode or you are not. You're either in flight mode or you're not. The instinct never has lied, never will lie to you, never has lied, won't lie
Right.
to anyone. The fundamental aspect of the instinctive center is honesty. Moving center. What do you say?
Oh my God. The first thing I thought of was throwing a punch.
Moving center.
I'm sorry. I think it was my brain being a little, or me being sarcastic, not sarcastic, but
That's
I
your
didn't.
instinctive center trying to tell me what it can do. That was your instinctive center trying to tell me what it can do. It was not only honest, but also, yeah, throw a punch. That's what I can do. Moving center.
The moving center now would be the one that is, I would say, carrying out the act, if you will. It is, yeah, but it's got to be more than just taking, move or doing the act, performing the act. of the attitude.
And a hint.
God, I just can't place it.
I would call it impartial.
How so?
Remember, we're talking about criteria, not necessarily the actions, but we're talking about the criteria of what each center is capable of doing.
Okay, yeah.
You're looking for the action that it partakes in. I'm looking for the essence, or I'm going back to the essence of what it is in its
Yes.
core. Yeah. The thinking center is a measurer. And you know this. Yeah. The thinking center is constantly measuring. If you and I are having an intellectual thinking center based conversation, the first thing that happens when you're confronted with an idea that you is either new to you or that you don't understand or haven't added up fully
I solve
is
exactly
it's
right.
going to go into the thinking center, and the thinking center is going to be like, hang on a minute, and it's going to run off to its storehouse, and start looking through things, going, is this like
Huh?
it? Does this match anything that I know about it? Does it feel or look like this? This is what the thinking center does. It compares and contrasts
Yes. Yeah.
anything that comes into it. It goes, do I have white stock, is what we used to call it. Do I have reference for it?
Yeah.
And do I have my white stock for this? If it says no, then it begins to look for how I can measure it. Yeah. If it's not like the red ball, if it's not like silver chalice, if it's not like some of the chemicals I've got down there, what is it like, Pierce? Yeah. How can I fit it into this framework? How can I measure it? How can I know it?
Yeah.
The instinctive center just says, is it honest? Is it true? Is it real? Is it honest? Yeah. Is it how? Yeah, that's it. That's all it does. When you're dealing with a dishonest person, the first thing that picks up on it is your instinct. Your instinct goes, mm-mm, you know, and it tries to tug on all the other centers, going, don't trust this person, don't trust this person. Yeah, it is the gatekeeper of honesty, whereas the thinking center is the gatekeeper of measurability. The
Yes.
moving center is the gatekeeper of impartiality, because judgment doesn't live in the moving center. Judgment is a derangement of the thinking center. Judgment shouldn't live in any center, actually.
Right. Right.
But the
Right.
moving center is the least partial of all. In fact, had this experience when I was a kid. Every kid probably has something very similar, but I was on this playground, and there's sort of this moat or pit. It runs about 4 or 5 feet down, yeah, and then about 6 feet across. Like you stand on this, what do they call them? The tire, not tire. You stand on the railroad tie. Yeah,
Oh,
railroad
yes.
ties
Yes.
are kind
Yes.
of
Yes.
surrounding
Yes.
everything. About 6 feet away across this moat, across this pit, is another railroad tie. And I have this distinct impression. I wanted to jump it, wanted to absolutely jump it. Okay. And so, you get up the courage, right? And you're like, okay, on three, on three, on three. 1, 2, 3, and then you like
Yeah.
pull back, like shit, I didn't do it. Yeah. And so you keep doing it. Now, what you saw there was an interplay between the moving center, who's just like, fuck it, let's do it, let's jump, and the
Yeah.
instinctive center. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
instinctive center said, trying to keep you alive here. All right. Not
Yes.
sure if this is makeable, if you're going to end up racking your head on the, you know, on or whatever the case might be. But the moving center is impartial in many, many respects. You should be looking for that impartiality. And really, if you ever need to be impartial in a situation, switch yourself to your moving center, because it will just be able to, it can just do. It can only ever do. It doesn't judge it. If it's dangerous, it'll still do it. The instinctive
Right.
centers will keep you from plummeting off of a cliff. Okay, so
Right.
impartiality for the moving center. So when you're building this criteria, it's still okay. When you're building this kind of criteria for these attitudes that you take out, into the world with you.
Right.
Ask, is it measurable? Am I going to know if I succeed or don't? Yeah. Is it reasonable? Can I be impartial with it? Here's another aspect of impartiality when it comes to the moving center. The moving center is also the king of the habitual life. And it likes to do that. It likes to be able to repeat itself, to be able to do, yeah. You see, I'm activating my moving center by all these things I'm doing with the rag
Yes.
anyway.
I've been
Right?
watching. Yep. Yep.
Have to.
Yep. Watching.
When you
Yep.
talk about it, it's going to come to the forefront, isn't it?
Yeah. It does.
But the habitual life can make you impartial if it's not in, actually can make you partial if it's not in control because it goes, oh, that's not what I'm used to. Take fasting as an example. Your moving center will turn very bitchy if you decide to fast and if you're not used to it. Yeah, it will turn very bitchy on you very quickly. And then it will begin to co-opt other centers and say, is this really reasonable? Right? Talking to the emotional center. I mean, is it really reasonable? We don't have to fast for a whole day, do we? It'll start bargaining and negotiating. And the thinking center's going, but it's not what we agreed to. This is a failure in my measurement. This, it becomes very aloof at the whole process. And
Yeah.
moving center can usually convince the emotional center that this isn't reasonable.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? We're made to eat every day, every 4 hours or some shit
Yeah.
like that.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
That's the criteria for that center. All right. Then what? Sexual center. This is going to tell you a lot about sex itself. And we talked about this too, that there's the lower end of the bar of sex, which is having to do with procreation, or in a lot of cases, just fun. Right? People do it for pleasure. And then there is the creative aspect of it.
Yes.
But when it comes to developing an attitude, what you need is unconditionality. Unconditional. It has to be unconditional, like love. Love is one of the least understood words in any language, let alone American, right? At least in Greek, they have 8 words for it. But got like agape and all these different types of love. But going back to the unconditional, from the standpoint of not putting your own personal bias conditions upon it. If you develop an attitude, if you develop an assembly of an attitude, you need to be able to apply it unconditionally. Because unconditionality is actually love. And this will transfer you into the higher purpose of something. Because then you take it out of the octave of the 5 lower centers by having this unconditionality about it and elevate it into an octave of higher purpose, higher essence engagement. You begin to have these sorts of attendances that come. It was said that the Emin is the faithful one.
Right.
Probably heard that term. That is another expression of unconditionality. Someone who takes this role of being an usher or a champion or these types of things, right? That I stand up here and try to do. Mostly a champion instead of an usher. It has to be unconditional from the standpoint of it's done from the love of doing it, not from anything else.
Yes.
I don't put conditions on it. And if I need to change in order to make it happen because it's my contract with creation, it really is. I have a contractual thing with creation about this type of work. I can't be putting conditions on it. And if I do, that which tries to attend to work like this, right?
Yep.
This way.
Yep.
Finds, because it's also unconditional from the standpoint that it has a motive. I wouldn't say a criteria. The attending essences and influences that go along with this work have a motive, or maybe even a motif would be a better word for it. But they will go where the action is. If there's not a man standing in front of a camera and standing in front of a group of people, and if there's not a man or lady, in many cases, if there's not someone standing there volunteering to be in process to allow this to happen into the world, it'll go find where it is, because its motive is unconditional. So in that sense, it has a sexual element to it, sexual center element to it. All right. So as you begin, it's good if you don't have a morning routine, but as you begin the day, it's very good to think back to yesterday and think, what situation did I encounter yesterday that I didn't have the right assembled attitude for? And then manufacture one. All right. So I do have it up here. Now you can see. Okay. I drew up this bar. I just was trying to stand over here. So
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah, yeah.
Thinking center, measurable. Moving center, impartial. Instinctive center, honest. Emotional center, reasonable. And sexual center, unconditional. All right. So you sit down in the morning, you take 20 minutes, and you manufacture an attitude. Let's take an example. I'll only go into a partial example. Okay. When dealing with people who are dishonest with you, maybe they're just naturally dishonest. Not naturally, I won't use that word. They have been conditioned by the culture to be dishonest. What kind of attitude are you going to take with someone who is dishonest with you? Now, you can follow a criteria like this and say, okay, the measurement of my of whether I've brought the most effective attitude for my life into a situation of dealing with someone who's dishonest will be whether I can walk away untainted without actually holding judgment against them, right? In other words, a heated judgment where you're diminishing, where you're lessening.
Right. Yep.
Maybe, that might be my point of measurement. Yours might be entirely different. That's okay. You don't have to have my attitude. You just have to develop and generate your own attitudes about various things. And then you can say, okay, let's talk about that measurable aspect for a moment. Is that reasonable? Well, reasonable is it is reasonable from the standpoint of being able to remain intact in yourself, right? Not having heated arguments with people, not getting kind of this exchange of heat and static and all of this other type of stuff that goes along with someone who's kind of a compulsive liar when you're dealing with them. Yeah. So the reasonable aspect is, yeah, of course, the emotional center says, yeah, I don't want the complex to be cluttered up by this. I still might have to deal with them, but I need to go in with a particular attitude that keeps me intact. So emotional center will say, that's reasonable. I agree with that. Impartial. Impartial would come down to who's lying. You run into someone who you really, really trust and generally have a good relationship with, and usually they're telling the truth and this type of thing. And you can't afford to cut them slack, or I should say, cut yourself slack in an attitude like that, because you will become infected and affected if they just happen to be in a role where that's what's going through them at the point in time. And so you have to be impartial. Say, yes, this does apply to everyone in my life, whether they're the compulsive liars or whether they're the occasional liars. It has to be able to apply. It has to be impartial and really unconditional also, doesn't it? And you can't put conditions upon it. And I think the honesty aspect is kind of very relevant when you're dealing with someone who's lying. But the other side to the honesty vector is whether you can do it. Honest with yourself, because you can create a four-legged criteria saying, yeah, it's measurable, reasonable, impartial, unconditional. Of course, I'm so developed that I can do that. And this is where the honesty might come and bite you, and your instinctive center says, actually, you need to do some work in this area before you can actually enact an attitude like that. And so then it opens up areas of personal development that you didn't know you needed.
Right.
So there's a very quick walkthrough example. Okay, it's not definitive, but it gives you something to be able to chew on.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would make it a practice if you wish to take it up. I would make it a practice to run through this type of criteria for just a few minutes each day before you start your day.
It's funny because I with people that are dishonest, I'm pretty dastardly. And as you were walking through it, I realized that I do this to people very much so. So when I've run facilities, I've brought contractors in and I've said, okay, first rule of thumb for me is don't ever lie to me. If you break something, do not hide it. Do not lie to me. You lie to me, and I don't tell them this, I'm going to fuck with you, but in a manner that is exactly like you just walked through. It's very interesting because I will get somebody that I have respect for, or need to have, required to have respect for in the culture or in my job life, right? And what I find is that I play a game with them that ultimately lets them know that I know what they've done. They've been dishonest.
Well, this also ties into attitude. Attitude is what stimulates standards.
Yes.
Because then out of a bunch of attitudes, you can build a standard.
Exactly. And it's funny because some of the people that have been with me over the years or still know me over the years is they know that they can get away with a smidge of bullshit. But bottom line is I will find a way to show them that I'm aware of it without making them feel stupid, because that's not my thing. I don't want to put them down. It's not what it's about. But it's like I turn it around in such a manner that they realize and understand that I understand what they've just done. And it's so funny when you walk through it. I could see this whole conversation with a contractor in Denver some years ago, about 5 years ago, 5 years ago, and the look on his face when he realized that I was very well aware of what he had done, what he had stated, and it was an awesome moment because he also understood that I'm not judging him. It's also very clear I'm not the judge. I don't judge people. We're all subject to our upbringing and everything else. That's his business, not mine. I don't want to correct or change people. But it was stunning to see his face when he realized, without a shadow of a doubt, that he'd not been played by me, but that but it was very interesting. I never even thought of it in the context or in the manner that you opened up tonight. Not aware of it, meaning it just seeing it for the first time for myself, what I was doing. And it was unconscious. It wasn't, and that's what I do to contractors, if with coworkers, if they're not honest with me, I find a way to make clear to them that I don't deal with dishonesty, but I don't want to belittle them, and I don't want to put them in a manner or put them in defensive mode. That's not productive for one. It's not what I like or want to do. But it is funny to think about all those steps, and sometimes, and as we were working through all these different centers, I could actually see examples of this in myself in my engagements. It's very interesting. I go, wow, I never realized that this is kind of what was influencing or what was going on, in me at that point. Does that make sense?
It does. And yes, and I want to spend the next 20 minutes telling
Yeah,
you, or at least working into what this leads to. Because it's one thing, if you don't have a higher, where are you trying to get, right, with attitudes? What are you trying to accomplish with attitudes?
exactly, exactly.
Becoming as kind of a tyrant. Yeah, you walk through life with a
Yes.
set of attitudes, and everyone's afraid of your attitudes, type of
Yeah, they're
thing.
afraid of you. Yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
and you don't want to be known as the attitude tyrant of of the world or of the office or whatever the case is. And so, what it really calls for is level of being. What we're trying to do is with our attitudes, we're trying to elevate our level of being. And the culture has this exactly backwards. Okay. A very curious thing that you have to look for when it comes to your level of being is not your best. It's not when you're at your best. It's when you're at your worst. Okay.
Yes,
You start
yes.
your baseline of level of being. Let's say that this is the baseline of worst. And sometimes you're up here, and sometimes you're here, and sometimes you level out for a little while and go down. But if you ever do this, that's the new baseline. Okay. That's the
Yes,
new baseline for what your level of being is. It's never here, it's never the peaks.
exactly.
What we're trying to do is to elevate the entire thing. Now, um, funny thing about the culture, and I should say, external people versus our own internal self. Externally, people will always judge and assess and render you at your worst. They will
Yes.
always render you down here. They will always be like, you know, so and so is a good guy, but man, does he get belligerent when he drinks, right? That's the chief feature that they call out in you. That's the chief feature that they see. Not you. I'm saying like they'll pick that thing that is you at your worst, and that's what they see. Conversely, and much counter to our own instinct, which is generally honest, we tend to think of ourselves here, right? At our absolute peak. It's like, yeah, maybe I get belligerent when I drink, but I can also, I'm also a very caring individual. That's mostly who I am, type of thing. And so it's such a dichotomy, isn't it? Where the external world views you at your worst as kind of, what you are, and then when we look at ourselves, we go, I'm up here, but now and then I'm down
Look,
here. Huh?
do you remember the analogy of being a fish in a bowl of water?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so this is the first thing that rose in me when you were just talking, showing the graph there, right? The way I've tried to temper it in myself, I want to run this by you, get your thoughts on this. So I've realized that I view myself at the peaks. Now,
What?
also for me, I view myself at the peak, at like Mount Everest, the top of Mount Everest, right?
Sorry,
The best, the cream of the crop, right? The funny thing about me is I also view myself at my worst. And I see actually both sides of the spectrum. And I find that one of the things I've done over the years is I've taken the counsel that I heard a long time ago, and it's ask other people, what do I appear like? Through questionnaires, or, if people feel safe enough to open up and really describe, really tell you, what the manner that you come across to people, the manner that you address people, look at people, and so forth. So I love to get feedback from people, and I'm pretty descriptive with some people, and I say, hey, I'm that goldfish in a bowl of water, and I don't know I'm in the bowl of water. And what I'm asking you is for help for me to realize, because I've tried videotaping myself, and I'm very clear with some people. Like I said, the problem with me with videotaping is I'm wasting about 2 hours of video until I finally forget the fucking thing is on. And then I start acting like I normally am. And then hearing my own voice, like somebody else did a recording here not long back, and I said, whose ridiculous voice is that? And I didn't realize it was my own bloody voice. And I said, oh my God, I was so appalled. But my point is that I've got these two views, I mean, extreme opposites of myself. The way I try to find that Middle ground for myself is I try to find out from others, and I weigh it out not just from one person, but from as many as I can. Usually, it's only a few people. How do I present myself? And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you later at the end. But it's how do I
Let
present
me,
myself?
yeah, let me jump in here.
Yes, please.
You're setting yourself up for a lot of lies. Okay. Both to
Run it
yourself
out.
and other people lying to you about it. Because although people are going to assess you here, they're going to tell you that you're somewhere in here just to keep from hurting your feelings. All right. Now,
Yep, yep, yep.
if you hold two views, then what you've done with yourself, and this is more dangerous than what they do, what you've done is you've set an upper and lower limit. Okay. You said, I exist somewhere in here. This is the nebulous cloud of what I am. And it's very easy to say, I see the highs, I see the lows, all of this type of thing. When in actuality, what you should be doing from a personal development standpoint, I will say the most effective approach from a personal development standpoint is you have your lows, you have your highs, goes on however it goes on.
Right?
Recognize only this, only the low. Forget about the highs. Forget about it, okay? Because they are ephemeral. They don't last. Neither do these. But this is the baseline that you have to work on. And what you do is you recognize this honestly. And then at bed, when you wake up in the morning and you jump out of bed, you remember this point and you try to make this your new baseline. So that as you go through the day, then what ends up happening, right, is now your worst is here. Okay? Your worst is now here, whereas it used to be here. You go to bed again at night, and maybe you make it up to this point in here. And now you no longer have this. You've got this is your worst, this is your best. And suddenly, you'll begin to develop new baselines, and you can say, now this is my worst, yeah, and this is where I am. This is called developing your being. You always start at the bottom and strive to make your
Right.
elevate your worst every single day. Every time you wake up, you try to move that bar of this is the standard I will not and absolutely will not ever drop below. That was my worst yesterday. That's no longer the case. Now this is my worst. And, eventually what happens is there's a convergence where your best and worst come together. Yeah. And that is when you can say I to something, because then you have a solid level of being that doesn't fluctuate.
So years ago, I realized that I cannot go. I'm going to just use three references: upper, lower, and or upper, middle, and lower. Years ago, I tried saying that's where I'm at on the upper, and years I tried going at the middle.
Yeah.
But I realized that I counseled somebody at work not long back, probably a year and a half ago, Dusty, that he kept saying the same thing. I'm in the middle. I'm good. I'm in the middle ground. And I said, no,
What keeps us
the way I
asleep.
perceive it. I'm sorry?
It's what keeps us asleep. That
It's
impression
exactly.
we're somewhere in the middle.
It's exactly thinking I'm okay. That means I'm going to stop trying, is what I told him. I said, my view is I'm going to stop trying at that point. I said, when I see myself at the worst is where I can actually grow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's in the culture, isn't it? I'm a pretty good guy,
That's exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So,
all right, let's do a proper say goodnight here. Okay.
Yes.
So that we have it for the end of the video. Bye, everyone who's watching. Bye. And then, okay. And I'll let you know when I've stopped recording and we can carry on for just a few more minutes.
No, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.